in the lobby, off the lobby, was a bar. And this drunk comes out and he spots Audie Murphy. And he starts hounding him for an autograph. And he wouldn't leave him alone. And finally, you know, grabs his hand and he's holding his hand. And Audie Murphy pushes him. And he had 2 guns and he pulled them up and he started shooting.
Hi, welcome to A Word on Westerns. I'm Rob Word, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Gunsmoke and the people who made it. Because I've got my guest today, he's Steve Stevens. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you, appreciate it.
What's the story behind Amanda Blake when Mantley was producing the show, and it was the 19th season going into the 20th season, and she didn't work the 20th season?
The story that Amanda told me, and I think Jim Burns would back it up, writer-producer Jim. Amanda's wardrobe for the last 4 or 5 years, they didn't get her anything new. They had to re-sew it, and it looked worn, and it didn't look glamorous. Originally in black and white, it didn't show that much, okay? Now, it's the lighting, you could see stitching, that kind of thing.
Patches, big patches.
Big patches. And she brought in several outfits with the wardrobe lady and said, look at these things are falling apart. Would you, this coming season, would you please get me some new outfits? And Amanda told me she didn't say to him, but she didn't care if we went to Western costume, you know, and got old movie stars stuff that's there, but it's perfect condition because that was part of her character in the show. And Mantley said, let me think about it. And he fired her.
Really?
Based on that. He just didn't like her coming to him and saying, this is what I want. And obviously he didn't think that she meant that much to the show. Well, he was wrong. Even Arnett said they probably would have gone another couple of seasons, you know, if he didn't change anything.
Well, she did come back for
a movie, one of the movies, yeah. Well, they paid her a lot of money and she needed the money. I don't know if that's the one that Ken Curtis didn't come back. Oh, it had to be the one because they wouldn't pay him the same amount of money they were paying Amanda, and that's the reason he didn't go back to that.
And that was the first one, I think. That's the one where they, you know, Jim had already done How the West Was Won as this great frontiersman with this wonderful gray hair, flowing locks, and big mustache. And so, because Matt Dillon had dark hair, they powdered it dark black and it looked awful. They never did that in any of the other films, but that first Gunsmoke movie, which the ratings were huge, of course. Everybody wanted to see it, but oh, it looked bad.
But the fans didn't care.
Yeah. Well,
Arnett's story, okay? I don't think you've ever heard it. And Arnett told me this when we were on How the West Is Won. And one of the stuntmen showed up on a motorcycle, right? And he started laughing. I said, what are you laughing? He said, it reminds me of this motorcycle story. I said, well, clue me in, tell me. He said, about the 8th or 9th season, he was in his car driving down Pacific Coast Highway. And all of a sudden, in another direction, he saw about 15 or 20 motorcycles. And he can tell that they were, you know, the real deal. And one that looks over and spotted him, and they all turned around, and now they're following him. It's the Hells Angels, right? And they get in front and they pull him over. And he said he'd never been, he said, I wasn't that scared in World War II. He says, I was scared to death. And they come over and says, you're Matt Dillon, aren't you? And he says, yeah. And this guy says, come here, honey. He says, would you sign an autograph for my mama? He says, yeah. She turns around and pulls down her pants. And he says, sign her ass, will you? And he says, of course I did, you know. And they said, thank you, Matt Dillon, and turned around and went off. And he says, I was there for like 5 minutes, sweat, just scared. That's how much they loved him.
Oh, man, everybody loved Jim
Isn't that a great
Arnett.
story? I know you've never heard that one before. Yeah.
No. As an actor, when you were younger, coming up, you did a lot of exploitation films, too. Like what, High School Caesar, Joyride.
Joyride.
And wasn't Chuck Connors in one of those?
Yes.
The Human Jungle.
The Human Jungle, right. And to think, like, almost, 25 years later, I'm his agent. I was his agent for, God, almost 25 years.
That was so early for him, too, though.
Oh,
that
yeah.
was before the Big Country and before Old Yeller.
Long before, yeah.
Ready! Aim!
I personally think that his best performance, and he should have been nominated, was The Big Country.
Oh, he was great. And
Burl Ives got nominated.
Yeah, and won.
Being Burl Ives. And Charlton Heston got nominated. But to me, Burl Ives was playing Burl Ives. Charlton Heston was playing Charlton Heston. It was almost the same character he played in The Greatest Show on Earth. Chuck.
Johnny said that when he was told that Chuck Connors was going to be his father on The Rifleman, he watched The Big Country and he goes, "What are they thinking? Oh, yeah. That guy's mean and crazy." But the relationship they had was wonderful. And what a wonderful sense of humor he had, too.
He was a great practical joker.
Like what?
Oh, he would just love the, the poopy cushion. He
and Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah, he loved that. Not big things, but little things. Meet him at a certain restaurant, and he's in Italy, but this is, come on down to the Plaza del Toro, or something. Chuck actually became my closest friend, starting off as a client. He would call me Little Dodger, and wind up taking me and my son Steve Jr. to the ball games. We go in the dugout, we go in the locker room, Steve Jr. get all the autographs. I've heard some crazy stories about how tough Chuck Connors can be, and yet I saw one of the most gracious, charity-giving man, sign autographs. He got invited to his first baseball card convention at the Anaheim Civic. And so I made up pictures and big posters and that kind of thing. And we got a bunch of Louisville Slugger baseball bats with Kevin Connors on it and an autograph. I think it was, yes. Later in the day, Saturday, they announced over the speaker that a young boy was buying some memorabilia and put his wallet down, and it had some money in it and it was gone. And if anybody saw it, please, turn it in. And Chuck heard that. And he says, "Go find out who that kid was." And so I tracked the kid down and I brought him over to the booth. Now you gotta understand, he's looking way up at Chuck, had no idea who Chuck Connors was. And Chuck said, "How much money did you have?" And he said, $31, in my paper route. And Chuck went, "Here," gave him the money. He says, "Shh, don't tell anybody." Turn around and walk away. The next morning, we open about 10 o'clock, and I look over, and people are parting for this police meeting. Looked like police chief, in uniform, with 5 or 6 bodyguards, all dressed in their A-class uniforms. And the kid is with him. And they come over, and he says, "It was him, Daddy." And Daddy goes, "Mr. Connors." He says, "This is my son. I want to thank you. Can I hug you?" And the police chief is hugging him. And that was Chuck, but he didn't want anybody to know. So that was the part of Chuck, that, didn't get in Confidential magazine, that kind of thing.
When you're representing these guys as their agent, how would you go about finding the right roles for them?
What I call it, the hee-haw era went out, and they weren't doing any more Westerns, right? And probably 90% of my clients were either name Western actors and a lot of the character actors.
Like, who were some of the other ones?
Slim Pickens, Morgan Woodward, Strother Martin, Elisha Cook Jr. for a while. So many that, you watch Me TV and you'll see all my clients and friends. That was before I represented them. So I had to go out of my way, Forrest Tucker, had to go out of my way to find other jobs where people would only think of them in terms of. So you started looking for Murder, She Wrote, which wanted those names. hopefully two-parters. Chuck did that. Dale Robertson did.
Police Story, were you involved with them during that era
Yes.
too?
Oh yeah. They
They all worked on Police Story.
Oh yeah. In fact,
Chuck was in the pilot of
Police Story with Sylvester Stallone, played his partner,
yes.
unknown actor, right? And Chuck, by the way, told me straight out, going to be one of our biggest stars. He says he's not a scene stealer. He is the scene. That's exactly. I remember that like yesterday. You know.
Well, it's all fun. I think the business, we've been so lucky to play in this big game of show business. You had mentioned to me the other day a story about Audie Murphy. I always liked Audie Murphy and Glenn Ford and those actors from the 50s. You could just watch one of their movies anytime. And Audie Murphy had this baby face, boyish quality about him, but something about his eyes, he could show that he was somebody not to mess with.
Well, with all those medals and, you know, and all the people that, you know.
And everybody knew he was the most decorated American soldier, too.
You know how many people he killed, you know, in war.
Yes, please, in the war.
No, and that's got to do something.
It did, and this before people realized the trauma that these soldiers were going through.
Exactly. Dale Evans and Jane Russell formed an organization called the Hollywood Christian Group, so that people within show business that were stars can go ahead and go to church, be it at somebody's house or at a church, without being hounded for autographs. And at first it started off at Roy and Dale's ranch, which is just down the block from here on Lassen, overlooking the Chatsworth Cemetery, Roy Rogers Ranch. And I had gotten to know Roy and Dale by working the show and became close friends with Cheryl Rogers. And because I was always needing the cuss box on the set, you know.
What is the cuss box
The
on
cuss
the
box
set?
is, if you wound up cussing, then Dale, if she heard it run over, you got to put a quarter in the cuss box. When they started using a teleprompter, which is just a grinding machine, and I could use my glasses, I would screw up lines and I would cuss, and she would come over, all right, Steve. And so by the end of the first week, I would come in and I'd say, Dale, and I'd wave $1. I said, just in case.
How old were you when you were doing the Roy Rogers show?
15. 15. I had my driver's permit. And so she invited me.
To the church?
To the church. And
Or to their house
but it was
at the
at the
time.
ranch to start with. And then it got so big that they moved to the Knickerbocker Hotel and the Grand Ballroom. And they were like a couple of hundred people, but Dale and Jane Russell paid for it, okay? And somebody decided to invite Audie Murphy. And he shows up. Well, in the lobby, off the lobby, was a bar. And this drunk comes out and he spots Audie Murphy. And he starts hounding him for an autograph. And he wouldn't leave him alone. And finally, you know, grabs his hand and he's holding his hand. And Audie Murphy pushes him. And he had 2 guns and he pulled them up and he started shooting. Well, I don't know whether he was arrested that night. I don't know what happened. But, you know, we all ducked. And anyway, the Knickerbockers said, you can't come anymore. So it got narrowed down to maybe 30 to 40 people at the ranch on Saturday evenings.
But Audie didn't show up anymore.
That was it. No.
Well, speaking of cowboys, one of everyone's favorites, Oscar winner, champion roper, Ben Johnson.
Great. Uncle Ben.
Yeah.
And we called him.
When did you first meet Ben?
I first met him when I got invited to the Ben Johnson Bum Phillips charity rodeo. And I had known Harry Carey, Jr., and he couldn't wait to introduce me to Ben, to telling Ben, look, this is the only agent in Hollywood, you know, that can rope a little bit. So, you know, you got to take care of him, you know. And Ben and I don't know, there again, we hit it off. I didn't want anything from Ben. He didn't want anything from me. Before you know it, we got teamed up. We started roping. And then one day he takes me in the bar and he says, look, I've heard from Doug McClure and a lot of people that you represent, you know, you're kind of agent I should have, but I really can't make the move. But I'll tell you what I'd like to do is when I get an offer, can I take it to you under the table and you let me know whether it's a good offer? He says, I don't know. I'm thinking way back, you know, the old days. Is this where the money is? Is this what I'm worth? And I'll take care of you. I said, you don't have to take care of me. I'd be honored to do it. He says, no, I'll take care of you. And so he would do that. And sometimes they say, you're worth a lot more than this. This is a joke. This is ridiculous. They want you, you know, they're going to pay you so much for one day so they can use your name. And it's the kind of movie that your name works for, you know. And I said, no, you shouldn't unless you ask for so much, whatever. And he took care of me, whether he had Tony Lama send me, you know, some alligator boots or, you know, or whatever. We never changed cash or anything. And at the rodeos, you know, he says, come on, I want Steve at my table, or, you know, get in my car, or, you know, and, well, the expression is before putting me over, you know, to everybody else, you know. And he was just wonderful. And you could see the adoration and the love that all these other actors that had worked with him, or the stuntmen and the rodeo cowboys, had for him. And always there for a picture, always there for an autograph. You know, you would have thought that, you know, he was just a stuntman, just an average guy. And yet, to be a world champion roper and win an Academy Award, and when he won the Academy Award, do you remember what he said?
It couldn't have happened to a nicer guy or fella.
Nicer fella. That's right. That was Ben.
Yeah.
Oh, I just, I really miss Ben.
Yeah.
You know.
And those were wonderful times to be together. Everybody was having a good time, and the ranchers, the people, the local people who were coming to participate and to donate money.
Used to come, you know, to them. When we go to a town and we needed to have the participation of ranchers to supply horses, when they said, well, who's involved? They said, Ben Johnson, you know, all of a sudden.
It's their best horses.
That's it. Load up the trailer, you know, whatever you wanted. You know.
And I learned to rope badly because Ben said, I'm a decent hand, and so doing the team pinning was good. I was good at that. And he says, Rob, you got to learn to rope too. And I go, I'll be awful. It's going to be bad. We'd show up in these different towns, and I'd think, these poor people who are going to draw me, I feel so sorry for them.
The Calcutta, right? Yeah.
And so anyway, but, well, you did some early work.
Yes, very early.
What's some of the early TV shows that you did, like Everglade?
Yeah.
Another early show was Captain Midnight.
Really early.
With Richard Webb.
Yes.
They shot those things in probably 3 days, right?
3 days. So, sometimes in those half-an-hour shows, Dale Robertson would say that they shot Wells Fargo in 2.5 days, so they shot 2 a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in 5 days.
Yeah.
On Wyatt Earp, when that first started, they were shooting 6-day weeks, half hours, and after the show became a hit in that first year, everybody went to Hugh and they said, Hugh, you've got to go to Edelman and tell him that we need Saturdays off, we need weekends off, we got a hit show, can we just not work on Saturdays and continue to let it flow into the next week? And so Edelman says, okay, you know, I can take this pressure. We're going to not work on Saturdays anymore. Now we're going to shoot 2 shows in 5 days instead of 6. And so they shot 2 shows a week in 5 days. And those were long days. But if you look at those shows, the cutting that we're used to today, where it's just back and forth, they would have these long scenes that would go for a minute or 2,
right.
where people actually memorize their lines.
Right. Dale Robertson had a problem with Stephen Cannell. Dale did a series called J.J. Starbuck for a while, and kept on coming to me, and he said, you know, he says, I just don't understand. I mean, we shot, 2 episodes, of Wells Fargo in a week, and this is 8 to 10 days for this episode. And Cannell, has got this thing shooting down at the beach, where his beach house is and stuff. Dale was not happy and could not understand You know, even though he did Dallas and he did some of these shows, he wasn't like
But he
working-
wasn't the lead on Dallas, so he
exactly.
would come in and he didn't feel
Right.
the pressure like he
wasn't
did
like
as
from,
JJ.
you know,
I'm the lead.
working
and,
7 days, and,
Yeah.
you know, and that kind of thing. Dale just he just couldn't put his.
Dale seemed like such a wonderful guy.
He was to me. Tartikoff, right?
Brandon Tartikoff was head of scheduling.
Scheduling, right. Well, he came up with the idea of J.J. Starbuck and called Cannell. He says, you write me a good pilot, I'll okay it. We'll do the pilot. And I'm going to tell you, you get me Dale Robertson, we're going to go to series. Easiest booking I ever did. Dale was making a fortune, more money than he ever made per episode. But for some reason, we were opposite Jake and the Fat Man. And I'm thinking, you know, we're going to kill him. You know, who's going to watch Jake and the Fat Man, right? But we were even. And so he had called Tartikoff a couple of times, and Tartikoff didn't return his call for some reason. And we're at the smokehouse and having lunch, and Tartikoff comes in and spots Dale and walks over and says, hey, Dale, how are you? And puts out his hand, and Dale doesn't extend his hand.
Does he know who Tartikoff is at that time?
Yeah. They've had production meetings before. And Tartikoff kind of looked him up and down, and Dale says, oh, you don't return calls for your stars? That's exactly what he said. And Tartikoff says, you're not the only star I've got on the network, and turned around and walked away. And I knew something was going to happen. By the time we got to the office, we were canceled.
Wow.
That was Dale.
It's all about relationships, isn't it?
And to everybody else, you would think Dale was an angel, you know? But some of them, when it came to business and stuff like that, they remembered the old days when they can control this and control that. I'm sure in Wells Fargo, nobody could tell Dale what to do, you know? And when he was starring in movies.
And he was the producer of that series, too.
Right, right.
Steve, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for taking the time and coming here and doing this.
Thank you, Steve.
It's been great, buddy.